Welcome to Rob and Tony's Cinematic Adventure. I'm Rob Wilson.
And I am Tony the Quano.
In this episode, we are going to be going to that classic time travel movie, Back to the Future. One of the greatest movies of all time. And yes, I know, I say that a lot, but that's because we get to pick the movies that we do. And we're only picking good ones. We're picking our favorites, at least to start out.
At least to start out with.
We'll branch out into other movies coming up in future episodes. But for now, we got to start with the classics, with the ones that not only we love, but there's huge love for them throughout the world.
Back to the Future, definitely an iconic movie at this point.
Yes,
it's
indeed.
Hard to find, even if you haven't really seen it or know much about it. I would think most people have heard of Back to the Future, starring probably one of the biggest stars of the 80s, at least TV stars, Michael J. Fox.
Yes, indeed.
He seems to still have a kind of a beloved ball. But anyway, it's...
And Christopher Lloyd was pretty big then,
80s.
too. I mean, you got Taxi
yeah.
and everything else that he did back in the day. But yeah, Michael J. Fox was Family Ties. We'll get into more detail about this later, but they had originally cast Eric Stoltz as Marty McFly, although their original choice was Michael J. Fox. But because he was doing Family Ties at the time, he was busy. He couldn't do Back to the Future. So they had to go with their next choice, Eric Stoltz. And so
he didn't work out so well.
No, he didn't work out so well. And so they ended up having to go back, and they were able to work out a deal with the Family Ties people to be able to get Michael J. Fox. So he would film Family Ties during the day, and then he would go and film Back to the Future at night.
The thing about Michael J. Fox, both Back to the Future and Family Ties, I was trying to remember, the first time I saw Back to the Future, right? Because, it would have come out when I was a toddler, not even a toddler, not even 2 yet. So obviously I didn't see it then.
Yeah, neither did I. I was a year old when it came out, so I didn't see it.
I always remembered that my dad had the Laserdisc version of it. But what I remember was seeing part 3, which we will get to in a few episodes. We're going to do all 3 of them since it's one very continuous story, all to be continued to each other. Anyway, I saw that with my family, and my parents really liked it. My brother liked it, and they were talking about, because it only came out a few months after part 2, that it was better than 2, right? Which I had, at that point, at least my memory now, was I didn't remember seeing it, right? But I knew of Family Ties, right? Kind of a very classic 80s sitcom.
Yeah.
Family Ties, Growing Pains, Cosby Show, right? The Golden Girls.
All shows that those of us who were kids in the 80s and 90s grew up watching.
But yeah, I don't remember at what point after that I remember watching Back to the Future, right? I remember Teen Wolf.
Oh, yeah.
Another Michael J. Fox 80s movie.
Perhaps a movie we should do sometime on the podcast.
But it probably wasn't again until a few years later, more probably 11 or 12 or 13. I'd watched a bunch with a few friends of mine. Never come over. We always thought it was really funny, but it's really kind of well done because it's a time travel movie. I think it does well of representing both time periods.
Yeah, it does.
Right? It's not like this overly romanticized version of the 1950s. It's not highly stylized. And even the 80s stuff that it does, it's it takes place in the 80s, but it's a very, that where he lives is lived in. They contrast too well, but they don't play up either era beyond credibility. So even when you rewatch it now, almost 40 years later, the 80s scenes, you're oh yeah, that's the 80s, but without that dated feeling. So I feel sometimes the time travel can play the two eras off each other just too much.
Yeah, you really can.
They do it well.
But they do it so well. Yeah, I don't remember really exactly when the first time I saw it was. It was sometime in my single-digit years, so before I was 10, but I don't remember exactly how old I was when I saw it. I think my family rented it or something, and we watched it, but quickly became a favorite of mine. I loved that movie just like every other kid in the 80s did, and early 90s, and it was great. I did not own it. I wanted to own it, but I didn't. The only one of the Back to the Future movies that we had was 3. We had Back to the Future 3. So that's the one that growing up I watched the most because we had the VHS copy of it. So growing up, that's the one that I knew better than the other two, even though I loved the other two. That's just the one that, just because we owned it,
You were familiar with
was
that.
the
You
one that I
went
was
back
more
to
familiar
again
with.
and again and again. And
Yeah.
that's what happens with some movies. It's the one that
But since
is
then, since being a kid, not owning it and not being able to watch it a whole lot unless it was on TV or I rented it, I've seen it hundreds of times since then. Because, of course, when I got older and started putting together my own movie collection, and I've had a copy of it in my collection for decades now.
It's interesting you bring us up about the VHS, right? I was just looking at this, I was trying to remember when I bought the DVDs of it, the original DVD release. So when it was released on VHS on May 22nd, 1986, it was priced at $79.95.
Yep. Because that's what they did with VHSs back in the 80s when they were
first
first coming
film
out.
to sell 450,000 units at that price point. And it was the most rented cassette of the year, which makes sense because it was big box office.
And I mean, $70.
And it was perfect because it's an exciting, fun movie had one of the biggest stars at the time, Michael J. Fox.
Yeah. And $70 was cheap for some VHSs. Some of them were, upwards of 80 or 90, depending on the movie. That's where video rental places, that's when they became popular, because it was just a few bucks to go and rent a movie for a week, and then you can take it back and you can go rent it as many times as you want, and then still save some money from going and buying it.
For $80.
So,
yeah, it's crazy. Yeah, so like I said, I obviously had the Laserdisc, and we didn't have 2 and 3. I didn't have that on Laserdisc or VHS. So I don't think it was really until maybe I rented them and saw them. It wasn't until the DVD release that I ended up seeing 2 and 3. The DVD release was 2002. I remember that. My parents got me a DVD player Christmas of 2001. And so I ended up buying the DVDs at some point when it came out. And watched those a lot. It was when the whole series kind of became iconic. Forever was just the first one. Oh, a tidbit. Talking about it as being all kind of one story. That's not how it was originally conceived. When they released it, they were not planning on the sequels.
nope.
Which is why there's a big gap. So if you look at today's Blu-ray release of it, they'll say to be continued at the end of the first one.
Yeah,
but that wasn't there.
That was they put to be continued there just as a fun gag at the end of the movie.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
And then people saw that and they're like, when is the sequel coming out? And they're like, oh, we didn't plan on a sequel. We just thought that'd be interesting to put on there because it's a time travel movie. So,
and time always continues.
Yeah. So there was so much demand for it, and they had more story to tell, so they made 2 more movies. And
of course, there's gonna be demand. It was a big hit because it's so darn good.
Yeah, it's so well made. The idea for Back to the Future came when, I believe it was Bob Gale, found his dad's old high school yearbook. And he was looking at pictures of his dad, and he got to wondering if I knew my dad in high school, would we be friends?
Classic question.
And so that's where the seeds were planted for the storyline of Back to the Future. He ran with it, and that's essentially what the movie's about. Marty goes back in time and befriends his dad, helps him to help set him up with his mom.
Just makes out with his mom.
Yep. His mom falls in love with him. But
mom sees him in his underpants, not
thinks his name's Calvin Klein because that's what it says on his underwear.
But yeah, I mean, it does this situation so organically.
Yeah.
And what I love about it is it doesn't it's all funny because of it'd be a funny situation. It's not being absurd.
No, it's not making fun of anything. It's just the situation it's funny.
And I think all the actors play it incredibly well. You're not going to see anything better from any of those actors, I think. Whether it be, Michael J. Fox. I think, Michael J. Fox, Christopher Lloyd, and Leah Thompson all had the largest careers. Crispin Glover had a few other things in there, here and there. But of those 3, they've all done other really good stuff. But that's the top because they play it really, really well. They play it straight. And Lloyd's he's eccentric, obviously, but... Yeah,
but that's the character.
Yeah, but he's not over the top. It's not like he's like the court jester. He still feels real. He's weird, but he's real. So I guess, for those that haven't seen it, have no idea about the premise, that it's a time travel movie, and Michael J. Fox, he's your typical teenager in the mid 80s in California. And he's got a girlfriend and he's in a band and his parents are both kind of losers and which is interesting. It's not something I thought a whole lot of before. It's like somewhat, it's all told like his perspective. So is part of the perspective changed a bit? Like, is what we see in the beginning of the movie totally factual, or just kind of his teenage view of his parents being kind of losers, right? Is it somewhere in between what we see at the beginning and at the end?
That is a good question. But the thing that makes me think that maybe it's not as much his perspective as it is, just how they are, is Biff. Because if Biff were really as timid and everything that he is at the end of the movie,
that's
Marty wouldn't imagine him being the bully that he is at the beginning. But yeah, I mean,
I think you're right.
His views on it could at least play a part in it. And the way that his family is portrayed at the beginning.
There's a few things we can kind of talk about the mechanics of time travel as we get a little bit later.
Well, you're talking about mechanics of time travel. All you need is a flux capacitor and a DeLorean, and that's time travel right there.
That's the greatest thing. Is like it's a DeLorean, but it totally places in the 80s, and you can easily think, oh yeah, that would date it like hell, but it really doesn't.
It's such an iconic vehicle.
Unlike, I love the Terminator, but some of the techno music, the techno club,
really dates it.
That really dates it.
Part of what makes Back to the Future so great, just like other movies, like with Star Wars, what we were talking about when we were doing those episodes, is the music is timeless.
Oh yeah, Huey Lewis.
Yeah, Huey Lewis. But I'm talking about the score. Alan Silvestri. Yeah. He's the guy that does the MCU movies, the Marvel movies, among many, many others. He did a fantastic job with the score. But yes, you mentioned Huey Lewis. We have a few big Huey Lewis songs in there. We got Power of Love and Back in Time. And you notice on Marty's wall, he's got a Huey Lewis and the News sports poster.
Yeah.
From their sports album, which is the album that had those songs on it. But it's
kind of funny. You have Back to the Future and American Psycho. Two movies that really feature Huey Lewis.
Yes, two movies that really feature... Oh, we can't forget the News. Huey Lewis and the News.
That's right. The score is a great point throughout the movie. It just finds the right tone and the beat and really swells up at the right point. And, again, not the score, but it's even, music they incorporate within it. Johnny B. Good.
Which we'll get into that whole scene later.
Classic song. Great scene.
Yeah, toward the beginning of the movie, as you mentioned, Marty's in a band, and they're trying to get into the Battle of the Bands at school. And so they get up on stage, and they start playing Huey Lewis and the News, The Power of Love. Right after they start playing, they get stopped by the guy with the megaphone, who just tells them that they're just too darn loud. That man is Huey Lewis himself.
I was like, that man is Huey Lewis himself. I don't know what it means for them to be too darn loud, and I've never understood why.
Oh, and their band's name is the Pinheads, by the way. Classic
80s rock. And later, Clive Barker would create a character named Pinhead. Anyway, I never understood why this principal, too, is not like he was a slacker. It seems really like his dad's like this kind of geeky, intelligent guy. You find out he thinks he's a slacker, too. He seems kind of smart.
Strickland just thinks everybody's a slacker.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I mean, I could see how he could think Marty's a slacker, because when he goes into school that day, it's his fourth tardy in a row.
I don't know. You get imagine, okay, you can be okay with what, I don't know if you can be okay with Marty's tardy, whatever. But, the opening scene is so, classic, because this is all the clocks. Yep. And then he just kind of walks in. You don't really see his face until the speaker blows out.
But did you notice one of those clocks does a little foreshadowing for the end of the movie? By the way, spoiler alert to everybody listening, we will be talking about the entire movie, beginning, middle, and end. So if you haven't seen the movie and you don't want to be spoiled, then pause the podcast now and go watch the movie and then come back and listen to it. If you don't care about spoilers, keep listening. But no, one of the clocks that it zooms in on at the beginning has the guy hanging off of the hand of the clock.
Oh, I don't know if I've ever noticed that.
Yeah. It's painting across the clocks. It kind of stops on one of them briefly as it's panning by it, and it's a guy holding on to the hand of the clock, just like Doc is holding on to the hands of the clock at the end of the movie. So just a little bit of foreshadowing there.
Interesting. Yeah, it's a good start, and they establish his character well because he likes music, and they show him he's late for school, he's skateboarding like a lot of 80s teenagers, right?
What's Doc doing with that giant amplifier anyway? I mean, it's like a room-sized amplifier.
But yeah, it's all the details. It's like it's basically just a garage is now like his house, because as we see in there, like that. Most of the house was destroyed.
Yeah, in a fire. There are theories going around that Doc burned the house down himself for the insurance money, but that's never been confirmed.
But some of the details of it is just like we're dealing within this time, especially kind of close time periods like this. It's 30 years. You see it later because it's the house that you'll see later in the movie in a garage that's off by itself. For now, it's next door to a Burger King. But it's almost the perfect time frame for that in a way, where you have like this 1950s America that's just gone out of the Second World War, right? You got the baby boom, the suburbs becoming a big thing, and then the expansion for the next 20, 30 years, right? You begin to see the suburbia that you see in movies like E.T., Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Gremlins, Goonies, and Back to the Future. The contrast of how it's growing within really a short amount of time, because what's crazy is that Marty 1985 is closer to 1955 than we are to 1985.
Yeah, and that's kind of sad. But yeah, it never really explains in the movie how Marty and Doc met.
No, it doesn't.
They are clearly very close friends, but it never really explains in the movie how they met.
In the movie, he's not the town-centric yet in 1955.
No, he is in 1985.
He's definitely town-centric in 1985.
He is in 85, but not in 55 yet.
30 years there. You can tell in 1955 definitely inherited a bunch of money from his family.
But yeah, apparently it's been revealed over the years that the way that they got together, that they met, was Doc caught Marty breaking into his lab, or breaking into his garage or something. Breaking into something on his property. I don't remember if it was on a dare from his friends or what the whole thing's leading up to it were. But rather than turning him into the authorities, Doc decided to ask Marty if he wanted to be his lab assistant. So yeah, that's how their friendship started.
I could see that because he's very much an assistant. Because as we find out, Doc needs Marty to meet him at the parking lot of the town mall.
At 1:15 a.m.
Yeah. Must be, it seems like it's probably a Friday night, because it doesn't feel like he has school the next day, and it makes sense to be at that time. And yeah, so it's like, we meet his principal, we meet his girlfriend, then we meet his parents. Meet his dad first, really, and then you don't know who he is. He's a guy named Biff, who seems like a massive dick. And is a massive dick.
Yeah. He comes in after
wrecking his dad's car.
After wrecking Marty's dad's car, George's car.
Because he was drinking and driving.
Yeah. But he doesn't seem to care much about that, just that George lent him a car that had a blind spot, and he didn't tell him it had a blind spot. And he was mad that because of that blind spot and the wreck, he spilled beer on himself.
So the question's like, hey, how do you not know that the car might have a blind spot? Especially like 70s and 80s cars that had those massive ass trunks.
Mm-hmm.
And rearview mirrors that were about the size of a postage stamp.
Yeah, there's no way a car like that could have a blind spot. But Marty's upset because that was the car that he was going to take Jennifer camping.
His
girlfriend, that weekend. And since Biff wrecked the car, he wasn't going to be able to.
That's one of those little details, like the totally normal teenage experience, right? Like you have this plan because you don't have your car yet, right? And then the car gets wrecked or it breaks down or something happens to it. Your parents are like, sorry, can't help you, right? And as a teenager, you think, oh, that's the worst thing in the world, right? And again, like I said, it's just one of those other little details that just works out really, really well with it. So it sets that up. And they go into dinner and meet his mom and find out his uncle's in jail and keeps getting denied parole.
Yep, Uncle Jailbird Joey. And we get to meet his brother and sister also. His brother, of course, played by Mark McClure, who anyone who has seen the Superman movie from 1978, that is Jimmy Olsen in that movie.
Olsen. His mom, by the way, we mentioned her, but it's played by Leah Thompson. His dad's played by Crispin Glover. But Leah Thompson, she was a decent star in the 80s. Some other movies out there, if you're not as familiar with her, she was in. You got the family, and like we said earlier, you get the impression that parents are kind of losers. And, they're still in the same town. Not that people stay in the same town or anything wrong with them. It's mostly because they failed to really do anything. It's 30 years later, and they still have the same guy that's been bothering them for 30 years, bothering them now.
Same bully.
The same bully, right?
Who's still making George do his homework. He's making him write up his reports for work.
But it's those things. And again, that's the funny thing about it. I'm sure there's probably pushovers out there kind of like that. And we find out, again, like we're saying, he was drinking and driving, wrecked some of the dude's car. We find out later in the movie it's not the only crime he's willing to commit in terms of ones that, most crimes are generally frowned upon, but major crimes are frowned upon that don't involve actually killing people. And then we jump into that night at 1:15 a.m.
1:15 a.m.
The Twin Pines Mall parking lot,
where Doc is there waiting for Marty. So Marty rolls up on a skateboard, and Doc reveals the time machine that he built into a DeLorean. A 1981 DeLorean DMC-12.
And everything about this design is perfect. Because it's funny, as he tells Marty, you're going to build a time machine, build it with style, right? You have this perfect 80s looking shopping mall, 80s parking lot. Think of the DeLorean, which is a very futuristic looking car. But then they design within it a flux capacitor, the time panels on it. It's all meticulously designed, and it just fits so well within that scene. And it's played well by both. We're talking about Christopher Lloyd plays Doc, and at that time, at least the adult audiences would have known it, like you said, for Taxi. If you ever seen One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, he's one of the patients in that. He went on to do other things later on in his career, obviously. He's a well-respected, established actor.
He went on to play Uncle Fester in the Addams Family movies.
That's right. He was in the Addams Family movies. I forgot about that. But even his look with his hair, the white jumpsuit, and then we find out beyond the flux capacitor what actually needs to power the vehicle.
Yeah, the car itself runs on gas, but the flux capacitor needs plutonium in order to...
nuclear reaction.
Yes, it needs a nuclear reaction in order to generate the 1.21 gigawatts of electricity that is needed to activate the flux capacitor and send the car traveling through time.
So, which gives me one of my favorite little points that comes up as of discussing this, is that he ripped off a bunch of Libyans.
Yes. They hired him to build him a bomb. And so he agreed to do that. And he filled a bomb casing with a bunch of used pinball parts and kept all of the plutonium for himself.
He somehow thought that they might not retaliate against him.
Yeah. But interesting thing, though. Yeah, it's a very important point because they catch up to him in the Twin Pines Mall parking lot. And, of course, they shoot him down. They try to take Marty out, too, but gun jams, and he jumps into the DeLorean.
Because
they have a little car chase through the parking lot. And while Marty's shifting gears...
Doc explains...
Oh, yes.
You need to get up to 88 miles an hour.
Yes, you need to get up to 88 miles per hour.
To activate the flux capacitor. That's what sends you to the past or the future.
Yes, because, once the car gets up to 88 miles per hour, then that activates the plutonium to create that nuclear reaction that then generates the 1.21 gigawatts of electricity that sends the car traveling through time. And so while Marty is driving around trying to outrun the Libyans, who are in their VW van.
Again, I always love that. The classic VW vans. Bunch of Libyan terrorists and German van.
So as he's shifting gears, his arm knocks the time circuits on, and when he's trying to see if the Libyans can do 90, once he hits 88 miles per hour, he travels back in time to the time set in the time circuits where Doc was talking to him about important days in history.
And the date was when he discovered time travel.
Yes. It was
when he fell off his toilet hanging a clock. Because everyone needs a clock.
Yep. Everybody needs a clock above the toilet. And he
granted,
fell off the toilet. Hit his head on the toilet. You do have a
clock because you're just scrolling on your phone.
Yeah, he fell, hit his head on the toilet, and all of a sudden got the idea for the flux capacitor, which is the thing that makes time travel possible. But interesting little tidbit, in the early drafts of the movie, The time machine was not going to be a DeLorean. It was going to be a refrigerator.
They did not want kids locking themselves inside the refrigerator.
That is correct. And they decided that a car would be a lot better of an idea.
To continue on this theme, Steven Spielberg was an executive producer on the movie. 33 years later, he would put Harrison Ford inside a refrigerator.
Yes, he did. In Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. One of the many things that was wrong with that movie. But not the worst part of that movie. A lot of people think that him climbing in the fridge was the worst part, but that was not the worst part of that movie. All I can say is CGI ants and CGI monkeys.
I was going to say fire ants, monkeys. I would have to say the random Wilhelm in the library.
Yeah, that too. That too. But that's a different movie.
Kate Blanchett was terrible in that movie too.
She was. She's a great actress. She's a great actress, but she was not that great in that movie. She kept on losing her accent, her Russian accent that she was trying to do. Yeah.
I mean, at that time, Shia LaBeouf was like awful, and he was even better than her. Anyway, back to Back to the Future. So, and then it happens. He goes to the past.
Yeah, he goes to the past, and the DeLorean disappears the DeLorean disappears in 1985, reappears in the same spot in 1955.
And at this time, it's just a farm.
Yep, it's old man Peabody's farm, who Doc mentioned earlier when they first got to the mall, that this land all used to belong to old man Peabody, who had this thing about breeding pine trees. And so, yeah, for some reason, Peabody liked pine trees.
Doc's look about that I thought was always really kind of interesting. Maybe he had some history with them. So both his family was wealthy, Peabody was wealthy, I don't know. But he crashes into the barn.
Yeah, he crashes into the barn, wakes everybody up in the house.
Which obviously wakes people up.
So they come running out.
And what's weird is
Peabody, his wife, and their two kids, who Peabody's son, you know what his name is?
But what is it?
That is Sherman. Peabody's son's name is Sherman, which is, of course, a reference to Bullwinkle, where they had the segment Peabody and Sherman, who traveled through time. Peabody was a dog, Sherman was a little boy, and they traveled through time. So,
what I want to know about that family is the Peabodys look like they're into their 60s.
Yeah, but they have 10-year-old kids.
Older than 10.
Yeah, maybe 12. But, yeah.
Maybe one thing was just Mr. Peabody.
Maybe.
Mrs. Peabody was 40, but Mrs. Peabody looks like she's 60-something herself.
Yeah, I mean, maybe people just looked older in the 50s.
They'll try to explain it as oh no, the grandparents.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's their grandparents, yeah.
Maybe it's his name for his grandfather's Paul. It's possible.
But yeah, anyway, so they see him in the barn, they see the DeLorean, and they're wondering what it is, and Sherman holds up his comic book, and on the cover of it is a spaceship that looks almost identical to the DeLorean that's sitting there in the barn. So they think that it's aliens. And so Marty comes stumbling out of there in his radiation suit.
Which, because as we said, you need the nuclear reaction. They're handling plutonium.
Yeah, so they were wearing radiation suits when they were putting the plutonium into the DeLorean, and Marty was still wearing his when he jumped in there to try to escape the Libyans. But an interesting thing that I noticed on this watch through the other day that I never noticed before. So at the beginning of the movie, when they're in the parking lot and they're wearing their radiation suits, after they put the plutonium in there in the car and it's safe to take their masks off, Marty's headgear for his radiation suit was attached to the back of his collar like a hood.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah.
That was the only scene where it's like that. The rest of the movie, anytime they show that suit, it's a hard hat with a hinge that brings it down over his face. I never noticed that until I just watched it the other day. In the hundreds of times that I've seen this movie.
So the other little thing about that, too, about the scene, you mentioned that also, by the way, and you say that, and it's clicking that you're absolutely right about that. But beyond the suit, then you had the car, but you gotta remember, too, the DeLoreans had the gull-wing doors, right?
Yeah.
That's not something that they would see within a regular car.
No. The gull-wing doors that only need 18 inches to open. That's less than a regular car door. So
it makes sense that they're obviously freaked out. It's the middle of the night. Again, it's 1:30, 1:45, 2 o'clock in the morning.
And the drawing...
large crash.
The drawing of the spaceship on the comic book has what looks like a gull-wing door that's open on it. And so when Marty opens up that door and comes stumbling out in his radiation suit that looks very similar to what the aliens look like on the cover of the comic book, they think it's an invasion. So Peabody goes and gets the shotgun. Marty goes racing out of the barn, trying to escape getting shot again, and runs over one of Peabody's prized pine trees. He had two identical pine trees out in his front yard with a little picket fence around them, which is the namesake.
That will show up later.
Which those were those pine trees.
I always liked it. After they run away, from the
runs
barn,
over one,
right? Marty comes out of the barn. And he's like, "Sorry about your barn." He's very polite about it.
Yeah, he is. Very polite about it. And he gets greeted with a load of buckshot flying past his head.
So obviously, he realizes he's going to have to stash his car somewhere because he's beginning to realize things are a little funky. Well, he runs out of the plutonium, right? Yeah. That's what happens. He doesn't enough.
Yeah, because it's one pellet of plutonium for one trip.
Yeah.
So he used his plutonium. And runs out of gas, so he pushes the DeLorean behind a big billboard to hide it, and then covers it with
he walks
leaves
to town.
And stuff. Walks to town in his life preserver, in his sleeveless coat.
This plutonium suit got me shot at. At that time, it's not fully putting it all together, which I kind of like. It takes him a while to kind of figure it out.
Which did you notice what the billboard was for?
It was for the houses where people eventually live.
Yes, it was for Lion Estates, the new housing development that Marty's family will eventually live in the 80s.
Yep. So then he goes in town, and now town looks. It's fun. I like how they play it because the 80s, the downtown section is not seedy, but not great. Got the clock tower, which we realized that was struck by lightning 30 years prior. She sees now, and the clock tower is working properly because it's before the lightning strike, which is obviously a major plot point later in the movie. Yeah, and it's just a much brighter. It's brighter. It's brighter clear. Area. And then he finally sees someone throws out a newspaper, and he finally realizes it's 1955. And he thinks he's dreaming, which is a perfectly reasonable response. It's a perfectly logical response to everything he's been through so far. So, he walks into the diner. Very classic 50s looking diner. Asks if he could use the phone because he needs to find Doc. He needs to locate Doc so that he can get him back to 1985. And the clerk tells him, the phone's in the back. He goes, I'd never understood why in movies people would always tear the page out of the phone book when they need one phone number or one address that's in there. They tear the entire page out. Because can I have a pen and just write it down? Because then what if somebody else needs something that's on that page? There's probably about 200 names front and back on that. Yeah, but he just needed Emmett L. Brown, scientist. Which, Marty was fortunate he was from the 80s. That went back to 1955, where he would have realized how to use a phone book. If it would have been Marty's grandchild. Yeah, if it would have been Marty or his son would be like somebody alive now. I don't know how to find this. If it would have been a teenager nowadays, and if their cell phone doesn't work, how are they going to make a call? What's a quarter? But so then since he let him use the phone, the clerk at the diner, he insists that Marty buy something, do some business in there. He's kind of a jerk too. He is, but at the same time, Marty first orders a Tab, which was a very popular soft drink in the 80s, a sugar-free soft drink. But the diner guy, of course, thinks that he's trying to start a Tab. He wants to start a Tab. And he said, if you want a Tab, you got to buy something. So he orders a Pepsi Free, which, again, in the 80s, Pepsi had a sugar-free version that was called Pepsi Free. Yes. So he wasn't just asking for a free Pepsi, which I think a few years ago they tried to re-release Pepsi Free, but it didn't really work out too great. They keep trying to get, you have Diet Coke and Diet Pepsi have always been there, but Coke keeps revamping the Coke Zero Coke, or whatever it is. Then they try doing the 10-calorie ones. A big thing, at that time in the 80s, it's not there now. Yeah. Because how long did the 10-calorie Dr. Pepper last? Was it 2 weeks? Yeah. But remember NutraSweet? Yep. The big that used to be one of the big hubbub about NutraSweet, how if someone has NutraSweet in it, you're going to get cancer. Wow. All right. Yeah. If you're that hullabaloo. Under the age of, I would say, really, if you're under the age of 30, probably look up NutraSweet. Anyway,
But yeah,
yeah,
so
I always like that little exchange between the two of them because he's just
yeah,
it's again he's very natural about how he's ordering it.
yeah, and so
He's just doing it as how he would order it. And
yeah,
it's,
and so the guy at the diner that he's trying to argue with him that he thinks he's asking for a free Pepsi, so he tells him if you want a Pepsi you're going to pay for it, and Marty then just like reaches in his pocket, pulls out some loose change and tosses it on the counter and says, just give me something without any sugar in it. So he gives him a cup of coffee, takes a nickel. But I always wondered, the change that Marty throws on the counter, what if the money that the clerk took for the coffee was minted after 1955?
Well, it's a good question, especially the nickel had not changed between 55 and 85, right? Obviously, the minted date would be different, right? But if you do 5 pennies on there and all the pennies were post 1960, it would have had, before that, it had like the wheat on the back. But in 85, if you had anything from like the 60s, 70s, 80s, all had the Lincoln Memorial on it. So the diner owner could have looked at it and like, this isn't a penny. What is this?
Yeah. It's like, what are you trying to pay me with? But with it just being, a small change like that, which, yes, in the 50s went a lot farther than it did in the 80s, and a lot farther than it goes now. But yeah, I mean, he probably just didn't look at it too closely. He just saw that, oh, look, there's a nickel and a couple pennies.
But yeah, I always kind of like that exchange. And again, I think it's to the point I was saying, like, of something really good acting, because it's very natural. It's not forced. But again, he's just acting as anyone from 1985 would act. The owner's acting as any guy from 1955 would act.
Yeah.
It's very natural. But he orders the coffee. He gets a coffee and he sits down, and he's not like the person he's sitting next to. He's not thinking about.
He's not thinking about who he's sitting next to. You hear Biff's voice from the doorway talking to McFly and how he told him never to come in there again. And you find out that Marty's sitting right next to his dad.
Yep.
He's sitting right next to his 17-year-old father, George McFly. And so then Marty has his first encounter with high school Biff.
Which, at this point, like Marty's not, he's interacted with a few people. He's changed one kind of small thing. Now things are going to start to go into motion.
Oh, no, although there is one thing before all this happened with the diner employee who's sweeping the floors, Goldie Wilson. Because at the beginning of the movie in 1985, we see
a campaign vehicle.
Yeah, we see a campaign vehicle driving down saying to re-elect Mayor Goldie Wilson. And so Goldie Wilson is working at the diner, sweeping the floor, and he starts talking about how he's going to do something someday. He's going to be more than just a diner employee. And Marty says, yeah, you're going to be mayor.
He's like, that's right. He's like, and then...
Like, Mayor Goldie Wilson. I like the sound of that. I always like Goldie Wilson.
Racist diner owner mocks him.
Mm-hmm. I always like Goldie Wilson. He seemed like a cool dude.
So this is a good point. We can kind of loop around to it a little bit later because we should get kind of into the bulk of the movie first. Is that interaction is interesting because it feels like for the most part, most of what happens in the movie is that what happens in 1955 with Marty did not happen until Marty got to 1955, right? And then things change, right? Because he goes to 1955.
Yeah.
As opposed to some time travel movies, like, no, that kind of always happened.
Yeah. Yeah, there's
and then you get to that.
Yeah, that's where you go into all the different time travel theories and stuff. Like with Lost, whatever happened.
I'm kind of the opinion Goldie Wilson always was going to be mayor.
Yeah,
and
I am
too. Wants to make something of him. He wants to make something of him.
The way that the time travel rules are established in Back to the Future is, that when Marty goes back, he changes things, and then when he comes back to 1985, things are different. Whereas before he left, they were one way. When he got back, they were a different way. So that makes me think that Goldie Wilson was always going to be mayor, whether Marty intervened or not, because he was up for re-election at the beginning of the movie. He's planning on going to
night school anyway.
Yeah, he was going to night school.
There's a few more aspects of that we'll get into. That just as one side, because obviously with time travel movies, you kind of have to talk about the physics of time travel.
And different time travel movies have different time travel physics. It's just that some movies work off of one theory, some movies work off a different one. And that's part of what makes them so interesting, because there are so many different ways to look at it. And since nobody that I know of has ever actually traveled through time, other than just like the natural course of life, there's been nobody who can really give a definitive take on what time travel physics really are.
So Biff's there. He's not happy with George. Find out, again, like we said earlier, that George was doing Biff's work in 1985, so Biff wouldn't get fired. And now he's doing his homework.
Yep, he's doing his homework. But he's got to do it early enough so that Biff can copy everything down in his handwriting. Because if he turns in his homework in George's handwriting, then Biff will get in trouble.
But not too early because he sleeps in.
Yes, but not too early because he likes to sleep in.
Anyway, so it leads Marty to track down George.
But before that, in the diner still, Marty sticks up for George against Biff.
That's right.
And Biff and his buddies chase Marty out of the diner, where he then runs up and steals a kid's scooter.
That's later in the movie. That's when...
Wait, was that... Oh, yeah, you're right. That was later. That was after the I'm Your Density part.
Yeah.
Yeah. Never mind. Yeah, we'll talk about that part later.
George. Goldie's trying to defend George because Goldie realizes what it's like to be pushed around.
Yes, that's right. That's right. Yeah, you're right.
And then George leaves kind of without Marty recognizing it, and he chases him down, and he finds George peeking at his mom, changing her clothes.
Not George's mom, Marty's mom, Lorraine. Yes, Lorraine Baines. George is up in a tree with binoculars, which I don't know why he needed the binoculars, because the tree was right outside the house. It was across the street.
Which, by the way,
hanging over the street.
This ties into earlier in the movie at the dinner in 1985.
Yes.
Where they talked about how the two of them met.
Yes.
And they talked about how George got hit by Lorraine's dad.
By the car. He was
he fell out of a tree.
He fell out of a tree and got hit by the car. And then Lorraine nursed him back to health.
What were you looking at?
Yeah. Was it bird watching? And George really quickly tried to shut her up.
But, again, like, it's one of those things, like, I kind of like about the movie. One of the things I really like about the movie, too, that was like, this is obviously a story that Marty and his siblings knew really, really well. Because
they had heard it.
Their dad gets hit by the car by their grandfather. Their mom feels bad for him, asks him to a school dance, and then they fall in love and get married.
Rhythmic ceremonial ritual, as Doc calls it.
But they realized, too, that he falls out of a tree to get hit by.
Yeah, he falls out of the tree with binoculars in his hands.
Right. Anyway.
But so he falls out of the tree.
His instinct is not to let things happen. It's like he's like, oh, Dad's about to get hit by a car. You don't want that to happen.
Yeah, he's like, I know this story like the back of my hand, but this kid's about to get hit by a car. I got to do something. So George falls out of the tree. Lorraine's dad comes driving up. Marty sees him, pushes him out of the way. Marty gets hit by the car and knocked out when his head hits the ground. And it's Marty that gets nursed back to health by Lorraine instead of George.
In one of the weirdest ways to ever wake up.
Yeah. And for some reason, Lorraine took off Marty's pants. And so he's sitting there in his purple Calvin Klein underwear. And that's why Lorraine thinks that his name is Calvin, because it says Calvin Klein on his underwear.
It's obviously really weird, too, because, it's a dark room. He's waking up after being concussed, and now he hears his mom's voice, and he's thinking that the last thing he remembers is just a dream, because it was all kind of crazy.
Yeah, and then she tells him that he's safe and sound right here in 1955.
And then his mom is 17, looking seductively at him.
Yep. And so then he tries to get out of there as quickly as he can, but he gets roped into staying for dinner.
In one of the world's weirdest dinners of all time.
Yes, one of the most awkward dinner scenes.
He gets to watch the honeymooners.
Yeah.
So,
but he surprised everybody because he'd seen that one before when it was brand new.
Which is
when the kid from the Wonder Years told him that it was brand new.
What I've always wondered is it's like, what do you mean you've seen this before? It's brand new. And then he said, I saw it in a rerun. But then how would he not know what a rerun is? I mean, this is brand new. He should probably know kind of what a rerun might be.
I don't know. I mean, if it's brand new, if there's never been a rerun.
That's true.
Rerun probably wasn't a word that was regularly used before reruns were a thing.
That's a good point.
So,
I've always loved the scene, too, where he's like, do you have a TV? Oh, yeah,
we have two.
Two of them.
Oh, you must be rich.
I always love, too, right after he leaves, his grandmother is like, he's a rather strange man.
Yep. But before she does that, she asks him if he's in the Navy because of his life preserver, because of his sleeveless coat that was really big in the 80s. And so it looks like a life jacket. So everybody's asking him why he's wearing a life preserver. She asks him if he's in the Navy, and he's like, Coast Guard. But yeah, so he gets out of there. He goes and finds Doc, finally.
One of the little scenes I liked about it, too, right before he finds Doc, so he's asking them where the street is. And it's the same street, but the name's been changed. It's been changed to John F. Kennedy.
Yep, because he mentioned John F. Kennedy Drive.
It's, a slight difference. Like, this, he didn't recognize the street name, but it's only because it's been changed.
Yeah.
Doc lives in the same place, as we said
it was
earlier.
known as John F. Kennedy Drive, but in the 50s, nobody knew who John F. Kennedy was.
At least not at that point in the 50s. 1955 was still a couple years early on that. But so he goes, he finds Doc, and like we said earlier, the house is kind of a big mansion. It's off by itself, and knocks on the door, and Doc is wearing his giant
contraption on his head that he sticks a big suction cup to Marty's forehead.
To try to read his mind, which is funny in itself. And when Marty has something, he doesn't want anything to do with it. He just wants Doc's help.
And then Doc
gets
that
Marty's
upset
because he thinks his machine doesn't work, kicks it out of the house, and Marty starts talking about the flux capacitor.
Yep, and then talks about the flux capacitor. Then Doc goes and gets the drawing of it that he drew after he fell and hit his head on the toilet. And then he believes Marty that he's from the future.
But there's a problem. Remember, we talked about that you need a nuclear reaction, and he's out of plutonium.
Yeah, but they found that out because Marty has the video camera that he was recording Doc and everything on for Doc's reveal of the time machine. He wanted to have video proof of everything, so Marty was recording it, and they were able to hook the video camera up to the TV to play the tape. And future Doc, 1985 Doc, mentions that it requires 1.21 gigawatts of electricity.
1.21 gigawatts!
That's when 1955 Doc is like, 1.21 gigawatts!
1.21 gigawatts!
Nothing can generate that except a bolt of lightning. But unfortunately, we never know where or when a bolt of lightning is going to strike.
But we actually do.
But we do, because at the beginning of the movie, which we failed to mention earlier, when Marty was talking to Jennifer before school.
After school.
Then
this lady comes up.
There were people taking donations to save the clock tower so that it doesn't get torn down, so it can be restored to its former glory. And it said on the flyer that they had that the clock tower was struck by lightning at 10:04 p.m. on Saturday, November 12th, 1955.
I've wondered because the 1985 date is like October 26th, and then it's November. So it's all kind of in
November 12th.
The same time of year. Something that I didn't really pick up when I was younger, and I thought about more as I was getting older. It's like, they want to save the clock tower, but that's really more of a petition thing. So it's so they're collecting money to bribe the mayor, not.
That's what it seems like. Unless they were collecting money so that they could fund the restoration themselves. But a bribe sounds more likely. So Doc and Marty devise this plan that they're going to use what they found on the flyer for the time that the lightning is going to strike the clock tower. And they're going to use that lightning strike to power the flux capacitor in the DeLorean to send Marty back to 1985. Now, what it doesn't mention on the flyer is the exact second that the lightning strikes. It just says 10:04 p.m. It doesn't say there's 60 seconds in there that if they don't hit it precisely.
There's no second hand on the clock.
No, if they don't hit it precisely the second that the lightning strikes, or the nanosecond that the lightning strikes, their whole plan is shot. But
there's a problem because he could just hang out and do nothing for the next week inside Doc's house until that moment. But Doc has the great question: is did he interact with anybody?
Yes. And then Marty reveals that he kind of ran into his parents and sort of screwed things up for them getting together.
Oh yeah, he hit Dad. It's oh yeah, he hit my dad. No, he hit me with her. And thankfully, he had a photograph.
Yes, of him and his brother and sister, and parts of them start disappearing.
Which, even before Doc makes the realization about it, when he first shows the photograph, which I approves of 85, Doc looks at it, oh, and your brother's head's gone. And he realizes what it is later after he understands this really is a time travel machine. But now they realize, as Doc says, being erased from existence.
Yes, they're being erased from existence because Marty changed
he intervened in the moment that catapulted his parents to get married. So that sets up the drama for the rest of the movie.
So now it's a race against time.
Not only got to get back in the time, he's got to get his parents back.
Yeah, it's a race against time, literally.
Yeah, he's got a week
to get his parents together. Otherwise, he and his siblings are going to be erased from history.
Which, as Marty puts it, is very heavy.
Yes, it's heavy, Doc.
What's wrong with
Doc's
the
like,
Earth's gravitational pull?
Yeah, what does weight have to do with it? Is there something wrong with the Earth's gravitational pull in the future?
Very geeky. Anyway.
Yeah. But yeah, so they, the next day, Doc and Marty go to the school to try to figure out a plan on how to get Marty's parents together.
I still don't know how Marty walked around that school without being like, shouldn't he be in class?
Yeah. Well, I mean, he was with Doc, so maybe,
yeah.
And since nobody knew him at that school, maybe it was, they thought that it was a father and son taking a tour or something. Maybe.
Yeah, reasonable.
I don't know. But they come across a poster for the Enchantment Under the Sea dance, and that's when Doc says, "Oh, look, a rhythmic ceremonial ritual."
That's right. They're supposed to go to this.
Yeah.
And, kind of a weird thing. Again, kind of weird to see your high school at that point, your parents being out of high school. There's other little moments in there. I think that moment of, him seeing his dad at lunch, his dad's writing science fiction stories. It gets back to what you're saying. It's like, oh, yeah, when I hang out with my mom, my dad at high school, he's seeing this other aspect of his dad that he never saw.
That he's actually creative. Really cool. That he has aspirations.
When he first sees him in the cafe, he's just kind of awestruck. Okay, that's dad.
But now he's actually seeing the person that his dad was when he was a kid.
He's seen his dad get bullied by the guy he's always seen his dad get bullied by. And now he's actually seeing this other side of him, which is really kind of cool. It's a nice little moment within the movie. And it's those things that really elevate it. It makes you care about everything that happens in it. The characters are so well fleshed out. That's a really good little scene to show it.
Yeah, it is.
And he's trying to convince his dad to ask her out. A friend might say, yeah, you need to ask her out. And his dad's like, oh, no, I think she wants to go with Biff.
Then it pans over and Biff is getting handsy with Lorraine, and she clearly doesn't want it.
Your meat hooks off.
Mm-hmm. So Marty gets up to try to defend Lorraine, and Biff squares off with him, grabs him, he's about to hit him, and Principal Strickland comes walking up, who is he's been principal for at least 30 years at that school.
He still looks 60.
He still looks the same as he did in 1985, and still calling people slackers.
Tells Marty to make a tree.
Biff tells Marty to make like a tree and get out of here.
Get out of here. That's right. So leave. Make like a tree.
Why don't you make like a tree and get out of here?
Yeah, and again, Marty comes to the rescue. So Lorraine's even more enamored with him now.
Yeah, and so now Marty's really determined to try to get George and Lorraine together because he keeps on messing things up.
Do you think the original thing was the purple underwear?
Maybe Lorraine just likes purple. But yeah, so then, after school, Marty's hanging out with George, trying to figure out what to do, and they see Lorraine in the diner. And so Marty starts talking to George. Oh, wait, no. Before that, it's the next day that happens, isn't it?
The next day.
Yeah, because that
night.
Because that afternoon after school, Marty is talking to George about, why don't you ask Lorraine to the dance? And George says, I'm not going to go to the dance because if I do, I'm going to miss my favorite TV show, Science Fiction Theater. And so, cut to that night, Marty, all decked out in his radiation suit.
And his Van Halen.
And a blow dryer tucked into his belt.
He's got the blow dryer. I forgot about that.
And he puts headphones on George while he's sleeping and puts a tape into his Walkman that says Edward Van Halen on it. You know why it says Edward Van Halen?
Why?
It says Edward Van Halen because they approached Van Halen to see if they could use some of their music in that scene. Van Halen said no, but Eddie Van Halen said yes. So they could not use the band's name, even though the band's name was Eddie Van Halen's last name. They could not use the band name Van Halen. So Eddie Van Halen gave them access to some of his studio recordings, just some of his practice stuff that was never actually put out into the world. And so it was strictly Eddie Van Halen's music, not Van Halen's music. And so they, in real small letters, wrote Edward over the Van Halen in big letters on the tape to show that it's actually just the single guy's guitar licks instead of the band's music. But yeah, plays that real loud in George's ears, wakes him up, tells him he's Darth Vader from the planet Vulcan.
Vulcan. Nice mix of it.
And that he has to take her to the dance.
Always liked it. It's like, Darth Vader visited me. He said to ask Lorraine out. Really melt my brains.
Yeah. So the next day, he tells that to Marty, and they go and find Lorraine at the diner. Marty gives him some pointers on what to say, and so he says, destiny has brought us together. all that stuff, and sends George in there to talk to Lorraine. And of course, he's all flustered and starts mixing up his words and ends up telling Lorraine, I'm your density. I mean, destiny.
I was like, don't I know you? He's like, yes.
Yes. George McFly.
It's so perfectly awkward. And like, this makes you wonder how like,
nobody can deliver that line.
Actually happened in the first 1955.
Nobody could have delivered that line like Crispin Glover. He did it so perfectly.
There's the complication then that comes in with Biff.
So then, Biff comes in, says, hey, McFly, didn't I tell you never to come back here? And then
everything stops in the cafe because of Biff coming in.
Yeah.
But then Marty trips him.
Marty steps in. Yeah, Marty trips him because Marty's sitting up at the bar. He's sitting on the bar stool.
And on the side, so he's not really paying attention.
And so as Biff's walking by, Marty puts his foot back there, trips him, and then stands up and squares off with Biff, which then brings us to there is one shot in the entire movie that it has not been confirmed, but they can't really deny it, that Eric Stoltz is still in the movie.
Ah.
And that is that shot right there when Marty punches Biff.
Oh, okay.
Where it just shows just basically Marty's ear and the right side of his head when he's swinging his fist up and he punches Biff. Because if you look at it, there's a definite height difference. Because Michael J. Fox is shorter than Eric Stoltz. Yep. Eric Stoltz was a little bit closer to Tom Wilson, who played Biff's height. And so there's a difference in height there. And you don't see much of the back of his head. You just see, like I said, his right ear and just the right side of his head. And Tom Wilson has gone on record saying that they did not reshoot the punch. Because they shot most of the movie with Eric Stoltz. But then he was such a problem to work with that they ended up firing him and being able to make the deal to get Michael J. Fox.
It worked out perfectly.
But yeah, so Tom Wilson has gone on record saying that they never reshot the punch with Michael J. Fox. So it is believed that in that one shot right there, Eric Stoltz is still in the movie.
I did not know that. That's good.
Once Marty punches Biff, then that's when Biff chases him out of the diner.
It's such a great chase scene.
And Marty,
it's funny. It's like it doesn't. In some ways, it is kind of like this car chase scene, and it's not up there with what you kind of think of. It might be the best sequence of the movie. And it's so iconic, and the music with it works so well. Yeah, he steals the kid's whatever it's called.
It's like it's a scooter. It's like a board with wheels on it, and it's got handlebars that come up there. So it's like one of the old 80s, 90s scooters that just an earlier version of it.
And he just makes it his own little skateboard out of it.
Yeah, it's basically the way precursor to the Razor.
Yeah,
Razor scooter. But so he goes in there, he rips the handlebars off of the thing, so it's just like a skateboard, but skateboards hadn't been invented yet.
Did not exist in the 50s.
And so
and he's being chased around.
What gets me is the kid that he steals it from, he's got his friend there with him that's also on one of those things. And when Marty picks up the kid, takes him off of his scooter, and he goes to grab the scooter, the other kid, he's defending his friend's scooter. Like, he grabs the top of it, he starts trying to hold it down while Marty's trying to pull it away from him. That kid deserves some recognition for trying to defend his friend's property.
Yeah, he doesn't realize that the other kid, Marty's just trying to escape from somebody.
Yeah. He just thinks somebody's trying to...
what a natural threat should do.
He just sees this guy, this teenager, trying to steal his friend's toy.
He's like, hey! And then they're like, whoa, look at him go!
So Marty rips the handlebars off of it and starts riding it like a skateboard and ends up being chased by Biff and his friends in Biff's car, which then he gets away from them and they end up running into the back of a manure truck. And all the manure in the back of the truck gets dumped all over them in the car, which that car, I'm sure, came from Statler Motors.
Yes.
Which that's one of those, and same with the manure. That manure company is in all three movies at different points in time.
It is. It becomes a running thing.
Is a running gag throughout all the movies too. Statler Motors in 1955, Statler Toyota in 1985, and Statler sold horses in 1885 and Back to the Future 3. So then Marty goes back and gives the kid back his new invention, the skateboard.
And of course, all the people in town are like, who is this kid?
Yeah.
And it's a Saturday afternoon, and there's this big chase. Like, it's going to attract a lot of attention. And then Lorraine's even more like, I want to, I want that dude to do you know what?
Yeah. So no matter how much Marty tries, he cannot get his mom to stop trying to get with him.
Or, as he says to the doctor, it's like, you mean to tell me my mom has the hots for me? And not in the normal way a mom loves her boy.
No.
She
loves him.
And so she tracks him down to Doc's house and asks him out to the rhythmic ceremony or ritual.
Yes.
And
no.
agrees.
He doesn't. No, she doesn't ask him out. She asks him if he will ask her to it.
That's right. I hope this is not too forward.
But I was hoping that you would ask me to the Enchantment Under the Sea dance.
And so he's reluctant about it.
Now, that comes after Doc has revealed his model of their plan for getting Marty back to 1985, where he is apologetic because his incredibly detailed model, he didn't have time to build it to scale or to paint it. But it is incredibly detailed, and he built it in like an afternoon.
It's just wood at this point. He hasn't painted everything. No. But it's really well done. I mean,
but it's the entire town square.
He's done this in less than a week.
Yeah, it seems like he did it like in the afternoon, like that day when Marty was at school and trying to work with his parents.
He's also been able to rig something that would attach to the car, to attach to cabling and wiring. He's done all this in several days.
Yeah, so Lorraine comes in, so they have to try to cover things up and try to hide it so that she doesn't suspect that they're doing anything weird. So Lorraine asks Marty to ask her to the dance. And so Marty, as we find out in the next scene, has accepted her request because he has an idea on how to get George and Lorraine together.
Needs George to look like a hero.
Yes, he needs George to look like a hero. So he reveals his plan to George, where he is going to pretend to be naughty with Lorraine in the car while George is walking by and sees it happening. And then George will pull Marty out of the car and...
hey, you! Yeah. Get your damn hands off her.
Do I really have to swear?
Think I should curse? Does it swear? Always like to. He's like, you mean you're gonna touch her on her?
No.
That's Mom you're talking about, Dad. Those are yours.
So the plan is for Marty to pretend to assault Lorraine in the car, but before he's able to actually do anything, George is supposed to be walking by and stop it from happening and be the hero.
A reasonable plan.
Yeah. So night of the dance, and Marty and Lorraine are driving up and decide to park in the parking lot outside the school. And that's when Marty finds out that Lorraine is not as innocent as...
Not a clean-cut girl.
Yeah, not the clean-cut girl that he always thought she was from how she presented herself in 1985.
She stole Mom's liquor.
Yep.
And then she
pulled out a bottle of liquor that she stole and started smoking, and then tried to make out with Marty, basically doing to Marty what he was going to pretend to do to her. But after she kisses him, she reels back and decides that kissing him is like kissing her brother.
So I guess that doesn't make any sense.
In which case, the door opens up, and Marty thinks that it's George, but it's Biff.
Because remember, Biff's car slammed into a manure truck.
And so Biff is mad at Marty because he ruined his car and he got him covered in manure. And so Biff and his friends drag Marty out and throw him in the trunk of a car that just happens to be the band. Marvin, Barry, and the Starlighters that are playing at the dance. So then Biff, I guess it's his friends that drag him out there and throw him in because Biff's still at the car.
Biff stays behind.
Biff stays behind at the car with Lorraine. So Biff is in the car with Lorraine, attempting to rape her when George, as planned, comes walking by, sees commotion in the car, opens the door, says, "Hey, you, get your damn hands off her," right as Biff turns around.
And he's like, oh, shit.
And Lorraine looks at him. He's like, help me, please. And so Biff gets out of the car because
like,
George is interrupting him and tells George to leave. George sees that Lorraine is in distress and is not going to budge. So he goes to try to swing at Biff. Biff blocks him, then twists his arm behind him and starts laughing.
He knocks Lorraine back to the ground.
Yeah, because Lorraine comes up to try to defend George. So Biff knocks Lorraine to the ground. George sees that. He gets this surge of courage and anger and balls up his other fist and knocks Biff out. One punch just knocks him out.
Which is all of a sudden, Lorraine now looks up at him as
with the same googly eyes that she's been looking at Marty the whole movie. And
from the distance, we get Marty seeing it because, well, not quite yet. He sees more of the aftermath of it later, but around that time,
because as
freed from the car,
as Biff's buddies, as his cronies put Marty in the back of the car in the trunk, the band members who are on break are out there getting high in the car. They're smoking weed in the car, and they hear them throw them in the trunk and shut it, and so they get out and sort of scare off the bullies.
They realize that the keys to the trunk are in the trunk. And this is like 1950s. There's no latch.
Yeah. There's no button you can hit on a remote to pop the trunk. There's no latch inside the car. You need the key to open the trunk. And the keys to the trunk are in the trunk with Marty.
I don't know why they're in the trunk, but whatever.
They've got to pry the trunk open.
They have to solve it.
And so
the lead guitarist slices his hand open.
Marvin Berry, not just the lead guitarist, but the
lead singer,
the face of the band. He slices his hand when they're trying to open up the trunk, so he can't play guitar because his hand is messed up. So then they recruit Marty, who can play the guitar, to play in his place.
Because Marty's insistent that they have to play because he needs to make sure that they kiss.
Yes, because if his parents don't kiss,
they stay together.
If his parents don't kiss, that means he and his siblings are never born. So they have to play.
And he has the photograph with him. He keeps looking at the photograph to see the progression of things. Everyone's slowly disappearing in it.
So he gets on stage. He's got Marvin Berry's guitar, and he's playing. Marvin's singing, and they're singing Earth Angel. Which I think I prefer their version to the Penguins.
Yes.
I think I prefer Marvin Berry and the Starlighters version.
They did a good job with it. It was no wonder, everyone in the dance wanted another song because they did it really well.
So they're playing. Marty keeps looking over the picture. His brother and sister are completely gone now. They're completely disappeared.
He's got, only his legs left.
Because George and Lorraine they're dancing, but then some other kid butts in and starts dancing with Lorraine.
Some little doofus. I don't know what his deal.
Yeah, and he's dancing all weird with her too. But
he pushes, he kind of pushes George aside, and George is going to walk back.
Then Marty, he starts not being able to play guitar anymore. He's just kind of strumming and looks at his hand. It's starting to disappear.
Everything's disappearing.
Which is losing any function. It's a terrible shot. It's clearly not his hand when he's sticking it up there. It's at the wrong angle to be able to actually have it be his hand, and it's the 80s special effects.
But then finally, George steps back in and pushes that guy to the side.
Yep. And then all of a sudden,
the music swells.
Yeah, and all of a sudden, Marty's hand comes back, and he looks at the picture. His brother and sister reappear.
They all pop up.
It's like everything's good.
I've always kind of liked that whole progression. He springs right to his feet. It's like this big reaction that happens.
And it's like, but what I don't get is when George comes and butts back in and starts dancing with Lorraine again, he shoves that kid.
He does.
One-handed, he just pushes the kid. He goes flying halfway across the gym. But yeah, so they finish Earth Angel. Everybody wants another song. And so Marty decides, okay, well, the future is saved. So I'm just going to have some fun. He starts playing Johnny Be Good by Chuck Berry. And so that's when we find out.
To be Marvin's cousin.
Yes. So when Marty's playing, Marvin runs over to the phone. He calls Chuck. He's like, hey, Chuck, it's Marvin. And then you hear, your cousin, Marvin Berry. Like Chuck Berry doesn't know his cousin. He doesn't know what his cousin's name is. It's like, you know that sound you've been looking for? Listen to this. He holds the phone out so that he can hear Marty playing Johnny Be Good.
And everyone's digging it. I love it. Like, you know.
And is that where swing dancing was?
Drumming.
Is that where swing dancing was invented?
But it quickly moves from 50s rock to like a 80s hard rock.
Yeah, so everybody's enjoying the song. So then Marty sees the time. He looks at the clock, and he's got to get back to Doc because it's getting closer to 10:04. So he's got to get back to the DeLorean so that he can get back to 1985. And so he leaves George and Lorraine. And as he's leaving, they start thinking, Marty, that's an interesting name.
Like, how did they name him Marty in the first place? I was like, I like Martin. I guess, it was Martin Lawrence and Martin Sheen.
Yeah.
He also asked them not to go hard on their son.
If their son...
He sets fire to the living room rug. Which, granted, the way that they act, I could not imagine them being that hard of disciplinarians.
Yeah.
At least how you would have seen them earlier in the movie and how Marty would know them. But that's a little beside the point.
So the storm's starting up. And he gets back to Doc outside the clock tower. And
there's one more thing he wants to change. So as we said earlier in the movie,
that's right.
The Libyans shot Doc.
Yeah, so before the dance, Marty went to the diner and he wrote a letter to Doc explaining what happens the night that Marty goes back in time. That the night that Marty goes back in time, Doc will be shot and that he needs to take whatever precautions are necessary to keep that from happening.
Doc has always been insistent the entire part. He does not know anything about the future, so nothing changes.
Yes, he should not know anything about his future.
It's a legitimate point. You get it. But you get Marty like this trying to change this aspect of things. So the last we see of it is, we see Doc discover and he rips it up and gets angry about it, right? And they can't really, Marty's going to tell him, right?
Yeah, so Marty's like, if you won't read it, then I'll tell you. But the storm's really starting to get loud now. Winds are picking up, thunder and lightning, all that. So he doesn't have time to be able to get all the information out before he has to get to the DeLorean and get it ready to go.
No, back to Fox's acting. I like how he switches it. He's relieved that he's gotten his parents back together, but switches it like, this is concern because like Fox is his best friend. And he knows like he may never see him again after they leave. Like he's had this chance to be with him the past week, but he gets back. If he doesn't change this aspect of it, he'll never see him again. And he's really worried about it. He plays it really well.
Yes, he does.
And Christopher Lloyd plays it well enough too, playing it like he has no idea what's going to happen. The connection of them in the 50s, we haven't really talked about it a whole lot, which is fine. But the way they play off each other is really, really well done.
Yeah, it is. So before Marty can get all the information out to Doc about what's going to happen, time is of the essence, and they need to split up so that Doc can go finish setting up the cable to the top of the clock tower.
To the starting point.
Yeah.
So he can get up to 88 at the exact time that the lightning strike runs through the cable.
So Doc climbs up the clock tower, standing outside the clock, and lightning is striking, and there's rain and wind and all this stuff, and he gets he loses his balance a little bit.
It's 10 o'clock, right? So the bell's tolling while he's up there, or it's loud with that as well.
Yeah. And so when he's trying to inch away on the ledge, a piece of the ledge breaks off under his foot, which, the beginning of the movie, that ledge is there.
Yep. Later in the movie, that piece of the ledge is gone on the clock tower. So that's another indicator that things at the beginning of the movie hadn't been changed yet. They weren't always that way, the way that they are at the end. But yeah, so that's when Doc is then, the foreshadowing from the clock at the beginning of the movie. When Doc, after he loses his footing and that piece of ledge breaks off under him, he grabs onto the hand of the clock and he's hanging on it. But he's lucky he didn't shift that enough that it changed the time.
Yeah.
So that when it got hit, they would think that was 10:02 maybe.
Yeah.
And not actually.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah, it's good that his weight wasn't so much that it knocked the clock hand out of sync. So Doc goes to try to plug in the cable up at the top, but a tree got struck by lightning and the branch fell onto the cable from below, so
all types of problems.
It won't reach it. And so he ends up being able to yank it enough to be able to get it plugged in, but then down at the bottom, it came unplugged right as the clock is going, right at 10:03. The clock is about to go to 10:04 and the lightning's about to strike. So Doc's got to get down and plug in that last plug before it's too late. So he creates a zip line to get down real quick. He takes some of the excess wire, loops it around the hand of the clock, and then slides down it like a zip line. Untangles the cable from the tree. And,
Marty is racing down.
Yes,
but Marty has switched the time he's going to.
Now, first off, the car won't start. Marty gets to the starting line. Car doesn't start. And so, in desperation, he headbutts the steering wheel, and the car starts. You know, he just sort of disappointed. He sort of just throws his head down into his arms and just happens. As soon as he headbutts the steering wheel, the engine starts. Yep.
But he realizes that he can set the time back a little bit because he's going to be sent to the time that he left.
Yeah, so he decides he's going to give himself 10 minutes.
Seamless.
Yeah, he decides he's going to give himself 10 minutes so that he can warn Doc before the Libyans get there. Why he only gave himself 10 minutes, I don't know.
Because he's not going back to the exact location.
No, he's not.
Right? You know?
Yeah. But so if he's going back across town, then why not give himself a half hour?
Half hour and then enough time to talk with people and be like, hey.
Enough time to get to Doc before 1985 Marty gets to Doc to learn about the time machine.
Before even regular Marty
gets that way he doesn't run into himself.
Yeah. And then Doc is like, why are you showing up in this thing I'm about to show you?
Yeah.
Like, you're about to get killed by Libyans.
But no, Marty thinks that 10 minutes is all he needs. So he's racing down there. Doc is able to get the thing plugged in at the same second that the lightning strikes the clock tower. And as the electricity runs down the cables, Marty hits it at just the right moment. And
he gets sent back to
it sends the 1.21 gigawatts of electricity into the flux capacitor while he's going 88 miles per hour. And Marty gets sent back to 1985. And crashes into the adult movie theater that is playing. Here's another interesting tidbit. So Red or Brett, depending on who, it's never really stated clearly in the movie. It sounds like either Brett or Red. The homeless guy that's sleeping on the bench that has the California Raisins logo on it, which that was a big thing. They had a big deal with California Raisins, and then they ended up getting sued by California Raisins because they were supposed to advertise them in the movie, and their only advertisement was a half-covered park bench with a homeless guy sleeping on it.
I could see.
So California Raisins got upset and sued them, and so they had to pay California Raisins a lot of money because they didn't promote them how they were expected to. But the actor that plays the homeless guy, Brett or Red, however you hear it or see it written out, I've seen it both ways. So the movie theater in 1985, that adult movie theater, is showing Orgy American Style is the name of the movie, which is a movie that the actor that plays the homeless guy starred in.
Wow.
Yeah. So yeah.
Okay then.
That was another little interesting nugget of knowledge. But which that guy, that homeless guy, also he was in the movie They Live with Roddy Piper.
Yeah.
Which is another good movie. But
good cult 80s movie.
Yeah. So Marty, the car won't start again after he crashes into the movie theater, so he decides he's going to run to the mall.
Which, again, now, obviously it makes sense that he's not there in time.
Yeah. So
he gets there just in time to see him shot.
Yeah, so he gets there just in time to see him shot.
To in the name of the mall, which was Twin Pines.
It was Twin Pines Mall at the beginning of the movie. Now it's Lone Pine Mall because Marty ran over one of the Twin Pines when he first went back in time. So
he waits.
He gets up there just as Doc's getting shot. So he waits for himself to go back in time.
Or the past, future. And he goes and thinks Doc's dead. I'm still a little bit confused by this because, like, the Libyans ran into, like, a photo booth. They could, well, that depends. I mean, I guess, theoretically.
It's a little, like, photo kiosk that they run into, and that shouldn't stop them.
Well,
but
they were going pretty fast.
They were, but
the guy with the RPG didn't have his seatbelt on.
No, he was standing up in the moonroof, and
So
he had an RPG. But yeah, so apparently all the Libyans are either dead or unconscious because they ran into a tiny little photo kiosk in the middle of the parking lot.
They're just driving around with RPGs and
Yeah. RPGs and AK-47s. Yeah, so Marty...
He's like, you know what? They may not be out of danger, though. Because, like, yeah, the driver probably had his seatbelt on anyway. I don't know. But
I don't know. A lot of the villains in 80s car chases didn't wear seatbelts. So, I don't know. Maybe they all died. Maybe they should have used that moment as a seatbelt commercial. But yeah, so Marty runs up to Doc, and Doc opens his eyes and stands up, and he's alive.
And it shows him a bulletproof vest.
Yes, shows him that underneath his radiation suit, he's wearing a bulletproof vest that caught all the bullets.
And then, he hands Marty the letter that he wrote.
Yes, the letter that he wrote.
Apparently he pieced back together.
Yes, he taped it all, but you could see the shininess of the reflection from the lights on the tape that he used to tape it all back together after he tore it up earlier back in 55. And Marty's like, well, what about all that stuff about the space-time continuum? And Doc's like, well, I figured, what the hell?
Probably missed Marty, you know?
Yeah, probably.
You know, that's what he was saying, you know, before he left. You know, I'm really going to miss you.
Yeah.
You're giving me something to look forward to, right? So he drops Marty back off at home. He says he's going to go 30 years into the future.
Which that whole... No, first, Marty goes home and discovers that his family is completely different.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he goes to sleep, he wakes up, and then...
Yeah, he goes home, goes to bed.
In the living room, and he sees the furniture is completely different. And his brother's in a suit.
His sister is dressed nice, or nicer than she was at the beginning of the movie. And, you know, he asks what his brother's wearing, and
like his brother's like a waiter.
Yeah, and his brother says that, I think his brother, like, before worked at, like, a fast food restaurant or something.
Yeah, that's what it seemed like.
Yeah. He was wearing some sort of uniform, some sort of, like fast food restaurant uniform or something. But now he's wearing a suit, and so Marty asks him what he's wearing. He's like, I always wear a suit to the office.
Which is weird because it seems like it's a Saturday, so like he's working on a Saturday.
No, I think it's a Friday. I think it's a Friday, actually, because Marty was talking about going this weekend to the lake with Jennifer, and he kept on saying it like it wasn't that day, like it was another day or two in the future. So I'm thinking that was a Friday at the end of the movie.
Okay, you're probably right.
But
his parents come in. His mom is thinner.
Mm-hmm. They're coming in with tennis rackets, like they were just at the tennis court.
His dad looks different. His dad doesn't have the geeky glasses on.
Now he's wearing big old 80s sunglasses.
His mom's talking about, aren't you excited about date? He thinks that,
but I can't go. I can't go. The car's wrecked. And then everybody's surprised and like, what happened to the car? And they go out there, and Biff is out there waxing the BMW in the driveway. George owns a Beamer, and Biff's trying to jip him. Saying that he's just finishing the second coat of wax now, and it's like, now Biff, don't you try to cheat me. And Biff's like, oh man, I'm just starting the second coat. So they go back inside. A few seconds later, Biff comes running in with a package, with a big box, and apparently George's book is there. He wrote a novel called A Match Made in Space, and Biff is now the timid, and he's the one who is taking the orders.
That's because George will no longer do his homework, or they never got
because George laid him out at the night of the dance.
He never ended up getting an okay job.
Yeah,
right. I think the job before was just still this kind of a regular type of job.
So Biff, ended up starting an auto detailing business where he details cars. But
then he also gives some keys to Marty.
Yes. He tells him that he just finished up waxing Marty's car and gives him keys, and Marty goes into the garage. And what we didn't mention earlier was back when Marty was was with Jennifer at the beginning of the movie, he
saw a brand new 4x4.
Brand new Toyota 4x4 pickup being transported to Statler Toyota on the back of a flatbed tow truck.
And he thought it looked really nice.
Yes, he thought it looked really nice. And someday he's going to have a truck like that. And so at the end of the movie,
his parents bought him one.
He goes into the garage, and parked in the garage is that truck. The exact same truck that he saw at the beginning of the movie.
And then Jennifer shows up, and he's so happy to see her. And I think it's kind of a point I had talked to him a whole lot about. He's thinking about, getting his parents back together so that he can exist. And wants as a doc. But, he's always thinking about his girl. She's crazy about him, right? Well, that's because that really is his future, is her. And that's when Doc shows up. That sets us up for the next movie. And he's dressed differently. And he's frantic about something, right? He told Marty he was going in the future. He's running to them. And he's finally settling in. He's kind of, we had this long week and long night, and he wants to sleep, and all of a sudden everything's changed.
Now, meanwhile, when Doc shows up, he's dressed all weird. He's got these futuristic sunglasses on and, this big yellow overcoat wearing future clothes, and starts digging through the trash can. Pulls out some banana peels, pulls out a Miller High Life can, which another interesting thing at the beginning of the movie, Biff goes to take a beer out of the fridge and comments that all George has is light beer. But at the end of the movie, George has Miller High Life.
Yes.
The champagne of beers.
Regular High Life.
Yes, not just regular Miller or Miller High Life, which has the slogan that it is the champagne of beers. So it's only for the high class beer drinkers. And of
course,
because George's status has been raised thanks to Marty's intervention.
He drives a Beamer and drinks High Life.
Yes. And so Doc starts putting the trash into the DeLorean, into Mr. Fusion.
Mr. Fusion.
Because when he was in the future, he upgraded the DeLorean so it no longer needs plutonium to work. It has its own fusion reactor that just uses trash and converts that into nuclear power.
Only we had fusion reactors today.
Yes.
We don't.
Yeah, if only we had Mr. Fusion,
not usable.
that we could turn trash into nuclear power. But
Marty is wondering what the hell is going on.
Yeah.
And as Doc says something has to be done about their kids.
Yes, about Marty and Jennifer's kids. But first off, they had to refilm this scene at least 3 times.
Really?
Yeah. Like they maybe not re-record it 3 times, but they had to film it at least 3 times. Because first off, they filmed it twice. One for the theatrical release and one for the TV release when it would come out on TV. Because there's one line in there. When Doc says they have to go to the future, it involves both of them, and Marty, in the theatrical version, says, what, do we become assholes or something? And so they filmed that twice so that on TV it wouldn't be dubbed. Because in the TV version, he says, what, do we become jerks or something? And so they redid that whole scene for that one line. But they also had to redo the scene because that exact scene, shot for shot, is at the beginning of Back to the Future 2.
But different actress.
Yes, different actress playing Jennifer. Claudia Wells plays Jennifer in Back to the Future. Elizabeth Shue plays her in Back to the Future 2 and 3. So they had to refilm that whole scene with Elizabeth Shue. Anyway, so they get the DeLorean, and Marty's concerned that they don't have enough road to get up to 88 miles per hour.
It's just a typical suburban street.
Yeah. And so that's when Doc quotes the iconic line.
The famous closing line, roads.
Where we're going, we don't need roads.
Roads.
As he puts his futuristic sunglasses down over his eyes, and he flips a switch, and the wheels fold under the DeLorean, and it lifts up off the ground and takes off into the sky.
To be continued.
And then it disappears because they're going into the future, and that's when the to be continued comes up, and then the credits roll.
And it's Back to the Future.
And it's Back to the Future. Fantastic movie.
If you haven't seen it, just go and watch it before the next one where we discuss Back to the Future 2.
Definitely it's well worth watching. If you haven't seen
timeless,
it, I highly recommend
it. It works really well.
Yeah, if you have seen it, watch it again. It's always worthy of a rewatch. But as you said, we join us next time for Back to the Future Part 2, where we will be discussing the second part of the trilogy.
In the year 2015.
Mm-hmm. Yep. 2015, then back to the 85, then back to 55, then back to 85. All this, all over the place.
We've seen many timelines.
Yep. I guess they don't go back to 85 yet. But so it's, starting in 85, 2015, then back to 85, then to 55, and then...
55, and then, Anyway.
But anyway,
we'll discuss all that next time.
Back to the Future Part 2. Yeah, any closing remarks you got, Tony?
I think that's all I have for tonight.
All right. Well, then we will see you next time.